Travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
To hear what my next guest thinks on the subject, because he is somebody who has just spent the last quite long while surrounding himself with just about every heritage he could find on the African continent. This is one of those stories of somebody who decided for a particular reason that he was going to set off to traverse the continent of Africa from one end to the other. He's a writer who lives in London, and he decided to cycle, and I think it was mostly cycling in the end, across the continent of Africa. He got to Cape Town just last week, and here he sits nicely tanned and looking very relaxed to be putting his feet up for a while. His name is Jake Thorpe. It's great to have you with us, Jake. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Pippa.
And
yeah,
welcome
it's great to be
Cape
here.
Town.
Thank you.
What made you decide to, I mean, you look like in your sort of mid-20s.
25.
25, okay,
yeah.
bang on. What makes somebody decide at that point when a lot of people are starting to do the opposite? They're starting to put down roots and think about building a career. You decided we're getting a little bit tired of doing all of that. Tell us how this began.
You're absolutely right. I felt a little bit like bucking the trend, actually, at this time. But I think I had this idea that before the age of 25, I wanted to go on a big adventure. I'd sort of gone straight from school to university to work, and without any meaningful breaks. And I just had an idea that before the age of 25, I wanted to go on a big trip. And so I didn't know what form that would take, but I started saving, putting a little bit of money away, and it sort of soon became clear that I was going to travel by bike. I joined a friend on a big trip of his own. He cycled across Eurasia, so from London to Kazakhstan.
Sure.
And I joined him for a section through Turkey and Georgia. And it was amazing, actually, on that journey that I started to realize just how possible it is. It sounds like a huge task doing a long trip like this, but it's actually very possible when you chunk it, when you break it down into small bites and you start to do one day and pack up your tent at the end of that day and, and set off and you kind of just, you go over the same routines and you form these routines and you can just extrapolate that and do it over months. So I started to realize that I was going to do this trip by bike and it was very possible. And then it was actually reaction. It was a reaction to the trip that he'd done. That I thought, I'm not going to do the same as you, so I'm going to draw another line. And that line was then Africa. So,
had you ever set foot on the continent before?
No, it was the first time. I've got a really vivid memory from when I was in the south of Spain in Tarifa, looking out over Tangier and over the Rif Mountains of northern Morocco. And there was a storm brewing and I was just scared stiff. I thought, what am I doing? Why am I about to put myself in the middle of this continent, completely sort of exposed, just me and my bike. But you just set off and day by day you become more comfortable.
Were you completely alone for the whole trip, or did you have people joining you for some of it, for all of it?
Yeah, so it was nice. It was nicely mixed, actually. So I had some company in the first stint through Europe. I was actually drumming up company. I remember kind of sidling up to people at Christmas parties saying, hey, have you got a bit of spare time? Do you fancy doing something cool? Do you fancy joining me on a part of my adventure? Because I was scared to be alone. It was a scary thing to set off for solo. So I managed to recruit two friends to join me for two different sections through Europe. And then I also was joined by three friends in East Africa who joined me for a month, cycling from Dar es Salaam to Kigali. But the amazing thing about bike touring is that it's such a small community of people. It's such a tight-knit group that you actually encounter different people doing different trips along the way. And you can join them for sections. So you have more company than you think. But I'd say it was about 75% solo.
That's quite fascinating to hear because, I mean, we have done quite a number of these interviews with people, and what fascinates me every time is that every person's reason for doing it is a little bit different. The motivation that set them on the road, sometimes it's about overcoming personal adversity of some kind. Sometimes it is about just wanting to break out of the box that they felt they were in. It's a little different for every person, and every story is different depending on who was with them and where they went and the misadventures they had along the way. But what you've just said about this being actually a community, that there being so many people out there doing this, that you can find others and join up with them, might surprise listeners. Was that the case throughout Africa? Wherever you went, there were other people having they might not all have been doing the whole continent in one go like you were doing, but was it that busy that wherever you were, there were people doing something similar to what you were doing?
It's really surprising and actually quite humbling that I've existed now for the last few months in an echo chamber of people doing these amazing adventures.
Okay.
And it's really important to understand that it isn't just for a select few. It's actually it's an accessible thing that there are lots of people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds who are out there exploring in their own ways and on their own scales. So actually, I was lucky enough to join a WhatsApp group. Well, not lucky enough. I found out about a WhatsApp group. It's free to join for anyone, of people cycling on the African continent. There's one for West Africa, one for East Africa. So that allowed me to be in touch with people. And so it's the beauty of this modern communication that it actually makes the whole thing a lot safer, a lot easier, and it really gives me respect for people who did this a few decades before, because that's really out there.
When you couldn't get a weather update, you couldn't ask somebody, hey, is that road clear? Or, is there protest action here, or bad weather or mudslides?
Exactly.
You've got all of that.
There's so
that
much
technology gives you. Does put a different spin on it. I have to ask about the bicycle, because you had to stoop walking through our door to get into the studio. You're not a short guy, Jake. That must have been the tallest bicycle in the shop.
It absolutely was. So I bought the frame from a small producer in the UK called Mason Cycles, and it was their biggest size. And I actually built it up with a friend who just opened a bike shop. And he said, this is absolutely the biggest bike I've ever worked on. So she's called Madonna. So I named her Madonna.
Okay.
And so Madonna and I have had some wonderful times together. And she's just become, such a companion. I actually stripped every bag off her for a race, which was my final sort of a stint of riding in Greyton last weekend. And it just felt amazing to ride her untethered. She was the star of the show. I was just a passenger.
I'm sure I'm not the only one going, it feels very appropriate to have stripped Madonna down to the very bare minimum. Sorry, had to say it. We are in conversation with Jake Thorpe. For anybody who's tuned in midway, Jake has just finished cycling. He is, as you can hear, not a South African. He's from the UK. He's a writer who lives in London, and he decided at the age of 25 it was time for a big adventure, and he hopped on a bicycle, and he has just finished his cycle across the continent. Highs and lows. I always hate asking this, because there must be so many stories and so many adventures that you want to share on different scales. But let's start with the highs. Did a particular country stand out for you, particular people, particular experiences of one place along the way?
Well, I think I'm going to use the recency bias here, because there's so much. It's such a roller coaster, so many ups and downs, and they can so easily sort of just get lost in this melting pot of memory. But actually, recently coming into Lesotho was a huge highlight for me. I was met there with such hospitality, and I was just struck, by the scale of the place and by the beauty of the place. And there were some really tough days riding there. There was a relentless headwind sort of pushing me backwards, basically. And I was having to pedal hard, even downhill. And then I was rewarded every evening with just an immense sunset. And yeah, it was a sublime place. It was elemental. I climbed up the Sani Pass, and there were bushfires. It kind of felt like ascending through the 7 circles of hell rather than descending. But it was, like fires and smoke and boulders falling, and these kind of winds at the top, these gale force winds. And then it was just this immense beauty every evening as the sun set and the peach blossom stood out on the mountains. It was amazing.
Beautiful. What about the lowlights? Did you have any negative encounters, injuries, breakdowns, things that weren't part of the original plan?
I was very fortunate that my body held up, So that was important. Exactly. But my bike, Madonna did suffer a little bit. So it was Madonna's wheels that were the biggest problem.
Okay.
So this is my 8th. I went through 8 wheels, 8 wheels on the trip, which is a huge number. And so the mechanical issues were there, and that sort of brought in delays and questions even about whether the trip was going to be feasible to complete. So there was quite a lot of emotional turmoil in that as you start to come to terms with, well, if the journey ended now, how would I feel? Would it feel like a big failure? And then there were a couple of moments. I mean, one particular moment in Zimbabwe where I was arrested. I was handcuffed and dragged off the streets for taking a picture in town, and I felt completely out of my depth and suddenly very alone and
Sure. How did
So-
you get out of that?
Well, through a good deal of interrogation.
Wow.
So I was brought into a police station and sat down and asked questions for 4 hours, and eventually it became clear that I hadn't taken a picture of government buildings like they thought. So I was let go.
Wow.
But it was just patience. Patience in these situations is really the biggest virtue.
Jake, one of our listeners asking how you navigate the challenge of visas, physically being allowed into each country. Did you plan all of that in advance, or did you have to sort of do it as you went along?
There's a certain amount of planning that needs to take place. I was also very lucky in that the WhatsApp groups provided a good deal of information that we were able to discuss the different sort of pitfalls or processes that different visas take. Essentially, it's again a game of patience and also a game of finances. That you do just have to shell out for the visas, and that's a kind of significant trip cost, but something you have to plan for. I'd say the most difficult was the Côte d'Ivoire visa, where I had to take a 500-kilometer detour down to Conakry, capital of Guinea, where I had to go to the embassy and get the approval there. But most of the visas I could do on arrival, and some were visa free. So it just really depended. But the WhatsApp group was really useful for the information.
Okay. I have to ask about the final stretch through South Africa. You said you'd never set foot in Africa before, so obviously this is your first trip to South Africa as well. What have you experienced in your time in this country?
Well, that's a really good question. And what I've experienced is very different from the expectations I had, as with a lot of the continent. So actually, setting foot in South Africa, I had exactly the same feeling I had standing on the shoreline of Tarifa looking out over the continent. It felt like everyone had a story, of a warning to give me about my time in South Africa, and it was so much so that I even repacked my bag so that I had my valuables in different places and things like this. I took precautions that I hadn't taken for the whole of the continent, and I'd felt incredibly safe throughout every country so far. But the reality was different. It really was very different. That I found going into places with a smile and going in with a greeting went a long way, and that I was met with incredible hospitality from people from all walks of life and all backgrounds, and that really was the prevailing narrative of my time on the continent. And everyone has a story about how their neighbor is gonna rob you of everything you own, but the reality is always different.
Relieved to hear it.
Yeah.
So, Jake, I mean, you've come to the end of the trip. Looking back on it, I've heard the word patience used a lot. So you've clearly learned some life lessons about the value of going in with a good attitude, a friendly approach, being open to people, and being patient. What else would you say are the big life lessons you've learned from this trip?
The big life lessons. This is a good question. I've got two that come to mind. So I had some very tough times in West Africa, just with the relentless heat that for over a month it was 45 degrees plus every day. Especially through the desert, there were times when the mercury reached 50. And I had a bit of a mantra for myself, which was hard day, not a bad day. That it can be a hard day, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad day. Although I must admit that when it was a hard day, I would often tell myself to shut up as I recounted my wisdom. So it's always difficult to hear in those moments, but I think that is a good lesson. And the second is that. As I was thinking, the end is always premeditated, that you do end up thinking about the end long before you reach it. And as I was doing some thinking over the last few days through the Karoo, I came up with a phrase which was, I'm not a proper adventurer, but I've had a proper adventure. And I think it's really important, actually, that we often hear these stories of people who've done everything, incredibly by the book, dipped their back wheel in the sea in northern Morocco, dipped their front wheel in the sea at Cape Point, and traversed every inch by bicycle or by human power. And I think actually, this perfectionism is unrealistic, and it might put people off just going on their own adventures and just doing it in their own way. And so I'm not ashamed to admit that there have been points where I've had to put my bike on a truck and be, and hitch a lift, or that, for example, I went down to Cape Point, but I didn't go down to the southernmost point, which is just along the coast. And if I was a proper adventurer, I definitely would have done that. Or even that after the ride in Greyton, I didn't decide to cycle the last stint into Cape Town because there were questions about what was the safest route and whether there was a particularly safe route to cycle. So actually it was about just having a year of adventure, not having to cover every inch by bicycle.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us and exciting us listening to you. And I'm going to borrow, if I may, that saying of a hard day, not a bad day is a really, really good one that I think more of us could embrace. So thank you for sharing that with us. And Jake, how long, the final question before we must say goodbye, how long have you got to put your feet up in Cape Town and enjoy the city before you leave?
So I'm actually heading out of Cape Town, flying back on Thursday midday. So I'm already packing it all in. I've been cycling up, the routes on Table Mountain. I'm heading to the Zeitz Museum after this.
Oh,
so,
enjoy.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of fun to be had still. But I'm definitely leaving stuff for next time and going to be coming back.
Great to hear. Jake, thank you so much for making time in that very busy schedule to come in and chat to us today. It's been great to meet you.
Thanks very much, Pippa. Great to be here.
He's Jake Thorpe, and if you want to read more about his adventure, please visit twowheelgypsyqueen.substack.com.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.